Have you ever had someone encounter you with this statement and tried to figure out, now what do I say to them? There's a poster that I have found. You've probably seen it before. This is one that has been around for a long time. That's the best advice that some people need to hear. When you get to the end of your rope, tie a knot and hold on for dear life. Each of us has been there at one time or another. What exactly does that mean? For the person who is at the end of their rope and they don't know what to do next, this statement may not be particularly helpful. I don't know what to do. Tie a knot and hold on for dear life. What does that mean? Particularly when believers go through rough times, and please hear this, being a Christian guarantees you that you will have rough times. Anybody agree with that statement? And those of you who haven't raised your hands, don't raise your hands for anything. I understand that. We do need encouragement when we go through rough times. We need to know that there's a reason why this thing is happening. We talked about Jesus preparing us. We are not yet a spotless bride. And so He's working on that in us right now so that when He comes back, we'll be ready for Him. And He instructs us to watch. Pastor Tim Keller writes about one example of this. British shepherds often take sheep and rams, one by one, and throw them into something called a dipping trough. A huge vat filled with antiseptic liquid. The shepherd has to completely submerge each animal, holding its ears and eyes and nose under the surface. This prevents all kinds of horrible little critters from attaching to the sheep and burrowing into the sheep. It is, of course, horribly frightening for the sheep, and if any of the sheep try to jump out of the trough too soon, the sheepdogs will snap and bark and force them back into the trough. And yet, as terrifying an experience as it is for the sheep, if they don't get this treatment, they would become the victims of parasites and disease. It's for their good. One Christian writer watching this process couldn't help but remember that Jesus is called our Good Shepherd and we are His sheep. And then she wrote, I've had some experiences in my life which make me feel very sympathetic to those poor sheep. I couldn't figure out any reason for the treatment I was getting from the shepherd that I trusted. And he did not give me a hint of explanation. As I watched the struggling sheep, I thought, if only there were some way to explain to them, but that knowledge is too wonderful for them. It is high and they cannot attain it. We too have a good shepherd who is committed to his sheep, though he often does things to us that frighten us, and at the moment we can't understand them. We know that. We understand that. But in the middle of the absolute agony that some rough times can bring to us, hearing that from someone may not be particularly helpful. God's putting you through this for your good. Yeah, it doesn't feel good right now. I've mentioned the name Stephen Fry before. He has been called a British national treasure, an actor and a comedian. He's also famously atheistic. Normally very mild-mannered, mischievous, but almost always polite. He was hosting a question and answer show for which he is famous, and someone asked him what he would say if, to his surprise, he came face to face with God. And being unusually vehement, he said, I would say, bone cancer in children. What's that all about? How dare you? How dare you create a world where there is so much misery that's not our fault? That's evil. That is utterly evil. His response makes me wonder if perhaps at some point he has been deeply, deeply hurt. Perhaps even a child who had cancer was part of his experience. Now, in response to that statement, the president of the London School of Theology wrote a response in which he examined what Stephen had just said. And it was very well reasoned and a very complete explanation. But the president of that School of Theology in London also made the statement that I hurt for him because I have the feeling that what he is standing on right now, his atheism, is a result of some awful pain. The fact is, explanations are useless to the person who's in the middle of the pain. As we're looking at Job, we're going to take two different perspectives through this book. One is the perspective of the person who's suffering, and we can identify with that because we've been there in one way or another. The other perspective is the friend of the sufferer. Have you been in a situation? You're walking through the funeral line. You're about to greet the widow of the person who's just died. The last person is done. You walk up to her and what do I say? Do you want to say something helpful? You don't want to sound trite. You don't want to be dismissive. What do I say? You as the friend of the sufferer. And the book of Job deals with that perspective as well. A Swiss doctor named Paul Tournier, in his early writing career, had some very good and important things to say about suffering. And one of the things that he said that gives us some inkling into Job is this: suffering is not beneficial in itself and must be fought against. He's saying that as a doctor. What counts is the way a person reacts to their suffering. That's the real test of the person. What is our personal attitude to life and its changes and its chances? I want to look at how Job is reacting to his suffering. We don't know how long after he was stricken that he sat on that horrible ash pile with everything gone, with every support system he's ever had disappeared. He is in agony and he is disgusting. He is alone. And the worst part of the suffering is that he's suffering alone and doesn't understand what he did to deserve this. His friends show up and they sit with him for a week. And they hurt with him without saying a word. And then finally, again, not knowing how long he's been there, this thing has been boiling up in him and bubbling and fermenting and just agonizing in him. And finally, he lets it out. And what he does, as we see on the back of the bulletin, Job vented. In verses 1 to 10 of chapter 3, Job cursed the day of his birth. I wish I had not been born. Better not to be born than to go through what I'm going through right now. And so for 10 verses in chapter 3, he vents the rage that he's experiencing. All these emotions have to come out, and they come out in him cursing the day of his birth. It's good to vent. But then once that emotion is beginning to calm a little bit, beginning at verse 11 through the end of the chapter, he begins to ask the question, why? Why? Why me? Why this? Why now? Why? And he asks a question that many, many, many of the senior saints I know have asked. Why is life given to a man whose way is hidden, whom God has hedged in? Why is light given to those in misery, and life to the bitter of soul, to those who long for death that does not come, who search for it more than for hidden treasure? Why does God give life to those who just want to die? He asks the question, why wasn't I stillborn? Why didn't I die the day I was born? Why did I have to live? God, why? Why is that universal question that every single human being asks, whether it's the 5-year-old or the 4-year-old or the 3-year-old, who will ask you why to every single thing you may say? Why is that plate gold? Because the people who made it from gold. Why? Because it's pretty. Why? 5-year-olds will ask you why forever. This is not that kind of question. Scientists will ask why to find out why the world works the way it does. This is not that kind of question. This is the kind of question that doesn't have an answer. Why, God? So far, his life has been ordered. God has kept him. He's been blessed. And there is a thinking at the time that everything you do wrong gets punished, and everything you do right gets rewarded. And Job's life proves that that's not the case. Why? Dana Logan is the head of chaplains at the Stone Ridge Retirement Center. And he instructs the new chaplains coming in that when an older person asks you, why am I still alive? Why doesn't the Lord take me home? Don't try to answer that question. Number one, because you don't know the answer. And number two, because that person needs to work through that question. They need to come to peace about it. When acceptance is not possible yet, and when bitterness and anger and that sense of isolation from God become overwhelming, Job does the one thing he needs to do more than anything else. He goes to God and tells God about it. The song we sang earlier, humble thyself in the sight of the Lord and he will lift you up. Go to him recognizing that you are not him and that he knows what's best. But when you come to the place in your life that absolutely nothing is giving you peace, you have no idea why you're still going through this, that's the time to follow Job's lead. By all means, the book of Job tells us, let Job be your model of patience, so long as that's possible for you. And when it is no longer possible, then go to him and tell him, I don't understand this. Be honest with him. And we're going to see in our discussion, our experience of Job, the time comes that even though he never got an answer to his question, he discovered, by being honest with God, that God was able to meet him and give him a sense that there's a reason for this. And God is even greater than what I'm going through right now. Don't be afraid to be honest. We're going to find out next week what happened when friends who tried to answer that question for him actually did more harm than good. And when God eventually said to those friends, "You've not spoken the truth about me the way Job has." Be honest with God. Let's pray.